I'm Lynn Oliver, and on behalf of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, I'd like to welcome you to our master class on creating the picture book for children. Sharing his enormous talent with us today is Tomie dePaola. Tomie dePaola is an undisputed master of the picture book. His some 40 years of publishing success have produced over 200 books for children, including Clown of God, The Art Lesson, and Day of the Blackbird, as well as Giorgio's Village, which won the 1982 Golden Kite Award for illustration. His Newbery Honor-winning 26 Fairmont Avenue sparked a series of autobiographical books, and his classic Strega Nona won the Caldecott Honor Award in 1976. 6 million of Tomie's picture books, a truly staggering number, have been published in over 15 countries worldwide. And in 1999, he was deemed a living treasure by the state of New Hampshire. Living treasure.
Living treasure.
You are a living treasure. I'm here to
you.
attest to that. Tomie, the goal today is to ask you everything that you have ever learned about the picture book, so that by the time we're done, it will be nothing but an empty shell.
Oh, great.
Is that okay with you?
Will I fit into 34-inch waist jeans?
Yes, yes. We'll see you shrinking before our eyes.
Great.
So let's get going.
Yes,
All
absolutely.
right, Tomie.
Yes.
What is a picture book?
For me, this is my definition. A picture book is a book that relies just as much of storytelling with the pictures as it does with the words. In fact, a truly great picture book can be wordless. So the pictures actually move the story along and move the narrative along. If the words are more important than the pictures, and yet there's a picture on every page,
Yes.
I would call that an illustrated storybook. It's a very kind of tight little definition, but for me, the picture book is a book that once the child has had the book read to them, that they can remember the story just by looking at the pictures.
That is a great definition. I've never heard it said that way.
Oh,
but
really?
that's-
Oh, okay.
Well, because
That's my personal opinion.
often people say that it's a book where the story is told equally in picture and text, but the idea that a child would be able to remember the story just from the pictures is a really wonderful criteria.
I think that's very important because for me, that's picture books are board books, but then picture books are usually the first books that children even attempt to read by themselves, in a corner.
Yes.
And I mean, that's what I did. I don't know whether you did that, but read it again, I'd remember the story, and then I could tell the story myself.
What are the genres of picture book? What are the various genres?
Well, picture books can be everything from fantasy to nonfiction, I think. I mean, I've done a whole series of nonfiction picture books for Holiday House, like the Cloud book, the Quicksand book, the Popcorn book, the Kids Cat book. Of course, I think most picture books got stuck maybe in the 60s and the 70s into retelling of folk tales and sort of classic things. But I think my favorite picture books of my own, besides Strega Nona, because she built me my swimming pool,
Yes.
as we all know,
Yes.
are the autobiographical picture books like The Art Lesson, The Baby Sister, Tom. And it's been fun to tell my own life story in pictures as well as in words.
So those would, even though they're based on your own life, they're stories, they're
And
narrative.
picture books,
They're
yes.
narrative.
And because the pictures are the thing that move the story along.
forward.
And when I was, of course, the technology of producing a book has changed so much that there was a time when they say, okay, this is it, no more changes in the text. You take a word out, it's going to cost us $100,000.
Yes.
Now, with everything being typeset in-house on the computer, you can change things right up to printing. So that's been amazing for me because my final editing process is when I get the first proofs and look at it with fresh eye and say, I don't need this sentence, I don't need this sentence, the picture's doing it all, and let's keep the text to a minimum.
You're still adjusting the
Yeah.
text. Well, we're going to later in our discussion, we're going to talk about actually writing the picture
Sure.
book. I'm going to
Yep.
make you, even
Okay.
though you were trained as an artist, I'm going to make you talk about writing.
I'd be happy to.
But for the moment, while we're still in the defining stage of this, what are the defining characteristics in terms of format of a picture book? what is a picture book physically?
Well, I think most people starting out aren't aware of the fact that a book. We've got some paper here, and I can show you why this is true. The typical picture book is 32 pages. Now there's variations in that, but you take a piece of paper and you fold it.
You're making a dummy now?
Well, sort of. I'm sort of making a little
Making
dummy.
a picture book.
And you've got how many pages?
Oh, this is going to be a math test for me? Oh, please don't. Oh, please
So
don't
you have
do
1,
this.
2, 3,
3,
4.
Yes.
And you
okay.
need this crease because that's where the book is bound. So because of money and things, you go fold it again. This is pretty thick paper, so this is a
I've got the math ready.
This is a strength test. But let's see if I can rip this here, because I think, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Had my breakfast this morning.
Good.
This is called a deCaola. It's a very
All right.
expensive picture book.
Okay.
So now you have half of what's called a signature, and you have, count with me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Signature then, I'm going to show off my
The
math skills, would be 16 pages.
16 pages.
All right.
And the typical picture book, I love this. It's like an
is fun.
early television
Yeah.
show that I had when I was a kid. Her name was Busy Hands, and you only saw her hands. Sort of like a Bob and Ray.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Draw
And
with
so now
winking.
you have one signature, and it's 16 pages.
So a
you
picture
have
book is-
2 signatures. Now, but here's where you can cheat.
Yes.
You can add maybe another 2 pages, so you can have a 40-page picture book instead of a 32-page picture book. But it's always got to be at least an addition of 4 pages.
I see.
And that's
Multiple
not
of
only
one.
picture book, that's with novels and everything, because they all books are bound in the center of the. But then the picture book has this interesting thing called self-ends. So if you don't want to do 32 drawings, you can take the first page and paste it down
Oh,
to make end papers. And then the book doesn't start till page, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I see. Because the front pages are the front matter, which consist of what, usually?
Front matter consists of at least title page, then copyright dedication page, and back on the verso of the title page. Although that, again, has changed. It used to be very rigid. The copyright had to be on the back of the title page.
Yes, yeah.
And the title page could be a double spread, or it could be one spread. Quite often in picture books, because you like to introduce, want the overture before
Yes.
the first act.
Yes.
So you have a half title.
Yes.
And that's usually in type or something. And then you have your title page or your title page spread, then copyright dedication, and then.
Is this one dedicated to me?
Yes, this is for Lynn. We'll put,
Okay, good.
For Lynn
Oh, I'm so moved.
with a big heart.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And then you start on page 5.
Right. So then in terms of the number of pages you have for storytelling, it can vary between, at the most, 30, 29 or 30. And
That's all up for grabs. I brought some materials here, but here's
We'll
a
get to the
manuscript.
dummies in
yeah,
a
but
minute,
but the manuscript. You talked about the manuscript.
Yeah.
And because I've been doing it for so long, I kind of write to the
Format.
the format or the structure. I write to the architecture. I
Right.
like to think of it as the architecture of a book.
I think that's a good
And
way to think of it.
and what's interesting for me is to illustrate someone else's text who might not know that architecture. And this is where I really work with the editor and the art director, and sometimes we kind of have to convince the author to move things around because their architecture, they'll go on too long and you'll
Right.
get too much text on one page, and you want to have a very good balance between picture and words, and then the important thing is you've got to have that page turning dynamic with
Yes.
a picture book.
And we'll talk about page turning when we
Yeah.
get to the structure of the story. But in terms of
Well, I'm talking about page turning as a structure of the illustration.
the illustration.
Because you just think about reading a novel. You turn the page when you come to the end of the page.
Right.
But when you've got a picture book, it's that picture that makes you want to, what's coming next? What am I going to see? Not read, but what am I going to see next? My style is very, very simple and very, I've worked all my life to make my style very stylized and very direct and clean, and I don't have a lot of little tiny details. Well, it's like my house, you know. I have a lot of stuff around, but it's all in order, and I like that in my art. And but I have detail that children notice. You know, little people peeking around the corner, or in Charlie Needs a Cloak, there's a little mouse that's stealing stuff that, you know, only children see at first.
Yeah. Well, it's true. We're also busy following the story,
the words, right?
We're trained as adults to do that.
And of course, for the picture book artist, for the illustrator, that's the chance for an illustrator to shine and to show who they really are. You know, what would make my Red Riding Hood different than, let's say, Trina Shart-Hyman's Red Riding Hood, which was very personal and very involved with her childhood. My Red Riding Hood would probably be, I've never done a Red Riding Hood, but I'd probably, you know, pay more attention to the grandmother, because I think that's a very interesting story.
Right.
You know?
Right. So it's a question of focus.
Yeah, so it's a question of focus and a question of how the illustrator wants to tell the story. Wally Tripp years ago said at a meeting that we're at, because there's always this unspoken battle between the writer and the illustrator.
Yes.
You know, it's my book, and Wally said, you know, you've written a book about a bunny. I get to illustrate it. It's my bunny.
I understand. Yeah. What are some picture books that influenced you and that helped define the form for you?
Well, when I was a child, my mother was an avid reader, and for some reason, my brother didn't stick with him, and he was 4 years older than I was, but I devoured books, you know, and before I could read. I'm talking about when I'm 2, 3 years old, and my mother read aloud to me every single night. Now, I was born in 1934, so the picture book as we know it today didn't exist in those days. What people had were collections and tipped-in illustrations, you know, like, the great classic illustrators like Rackham and, you know, Kai Nielsen and all of those people that are, you know, illustrious illustrators. Blah, blah, blah. And of course, those books weren't originally produced for children. They were called illustrated gift books, and they were very expensive and they very prestigious to have it on your hall table. And but children were never to touch them. But my mother read me collections. We had this wonderful collection, which I still have in my library, called A Children's Hour. And again, it's collections of, they're in categories, you know, folk tales, fairy tales, adventure stories, heroes and heroines, you know, and they all had tipped-in illustrations, full-color tipped-in illustrations, which means they weren't part of the printing process. It was printed separately and then glued in. That's what tipped in means.
Those are those ones that used to have a tissue paper
over them? They're really expensive books, had the tissue paper over them. It actually wasn't until I was older and in school that I kind of, it was after the Second World War, that picture books began to kind of take their own form again. And of course, some of those early picture books, like Virginia Lee Burton's books, and Mike Milligan, The Steam Shovel, and right after the Second World War, the art of illustration took a turn because many people, many artists had fled the Nazi regime in Europe and come to the United States, and two of my mentors from. And I fortunately met both of them, were Leo Leone and Eric Carle. And they were both from Europe and came and worked in advertising. And then suddenly started doing beautiful picture books. And the other artists whose picture books I devoured in art school, now I'm in my 20s, were the Provinsons, Alice and Martin Provinson. Right. And I was looking more at the adult vagaries of illustration, the formality of composition and color and technique. But through that, I suddenly realized, the turning of the page, because as you know, and maybe our viewers don't know, I decided I was going to be a children's book artist when I was 4 years old. And because, that was the only art I knew. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
In books.
How could a child decide to be an adult artist?
Yes, exactly. And I went off to a real art school, but a really good art school in the 50s. And
what do you think that children want to see and hear in a picture book?
I think that it's the same as with anything that you're writing, any story you're telling, any story you're writing down, it's got to have all those. A picture book has to have all the same quality that a good story has. It's got to have, good character, and of course, in a picture book, I like to. Let me back up here. I like to compare creating the picture book with putting on a stage production. I have to cast the characters. In other words, I have to draw those characters, and choose what they're going to look like. Is Sally going to be a brunette or blonde or a redhead? What's she going to wear? What time does this take place in? Then I've got to be the set designer. Got to create the atmosphere, the scenery, because words can do it somewhat. But the first picture book manuscript that I wrote looked like Gone with the Wind. Like this, long text, long text.
Right.
And Bernice Cohn-Hunt told me Who's
that?
Bernice, she wrote the first book that I illustrated.
Oh.
Yeah, she's still around. She's great.
Good.
She's a great woman.
Yeah.
And she she said to me, "I'll help you out with the manuscript." So I gave her the manuscript. She had a blue pencil, and she said, "Well, of course." And she started, crossing out my words. And she said, "You don't need that 3-page description of what the little old man looks like. In your case, one picture is worth 1,000 words."
Yes.
And that's the thing for the artist to understand. And that's where the young children, they could get very bored by lengthy word descriptions, whereas an image is aha. Because children can read pictures.
Yes. Because they haven't learned to read words yet.
They haven't learned to read words yet.
So they go to the
Absolutely.
picture.
Absolutely.
So they go to the picture. That's a fascinating point. Of course, for those people who are writers and not illustrators, the temptation is in a picture book is to overwrite.
Yes.
Because you're compensating for the fact that you're not an artist.
An artist, right.
So.
And a good picture book editor will encourage a writer to cut, to cut, to cut. And there are some wonderful writers of picture books.
Yeah. Yes.
Who know that lesson. One of them is Tomie Johnston.
Yes. She's a great writer.
She knows how to leave out things in her manuscript.
What do you think makes a picture book classic?
Let's take Peter Rabbit.
Yes. Let's say Peter Rabbit.
Peter Rabbit.
Why is that a classic?
That's a classic because it's about a bad little bunny. And when I read Peter Rabbit as a child, I didn't realize he was a bad little bunny because he was having all the adventures.
He didn't follow his mother's directions.
That's right.
To stay home.
Neither did Max.
That's right. That's right. So.
Neither did Red Riding Hood.
That's right.
She spoke to the stranger in the forest.
So are we distilling
a principle here?
That don't try this at home,
Don't listen to
kids.
the grown-ups. Right?
Well, but one thing you're talking about is that makes it a classic is telling it from the child's point of view.
Or from a point of view that the child identifies with.
Yes.
And maybe never thought of that point of view before.
Which might be anti-authoritarian.
Yeah, it might be anti-authoritarian. It might be my life is very boring, and look at what an exciting life they're having.
Right. So now we're talking about a child's point of view, or one that a child can identify with. We're talking about suspense.
Right.
Peter Rabbit and Max were in big trouble.
Oh wow, danger.
Big danger.
Big danger. Because after all, his father was baked into a pie.
That's right. So this was a life and death. Life and death.
He didn't quite
danger.
realize it, but
Right.
he didn't know his father was baked into a pie before he was born. So
Yeah. So
Yeah.
suspense and danger
Right,
are.
right.
I mean, that's something that people might not necessarily identify with a picture book.
When I first did Stregonona, which is a retelling of a classic tale, but I set it in Italy and changed porridge, which is pretty boring stuff, to pasta, which is a little bit more animated.
Right.
And if you learned how to twirl it on a fork as a kid like I did, because it's flying all over the place. And I remember reading Stregonona and showing the pictures to first graders. They weren't laughing. They were like looking. And then when the pasta pot overflows and starts to take over the town, they were like, oh no, oh. And then Stregonona comes and saves the day, and they were, oh. No, I read the same book to a third grade. They were in hysterics.
Really?
They were wetting their pants. They saw the humor in it.
Right.
So maybe young children see, danger. They see consequences. Whereas as you get older, you realize, hey, if the town gets filled with, first of all, the town can't get filled with pasta,
Right.
I don't think.
Right, right. Beauty would have to be a criteria, wouldn't it?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
all of the books you're talking about have beautiful illustrations and vivid illustrations.
I think that's all very, very individual, well, up to the individuality of the artist. I don't think there is a, quote, visual style
That works best.
that works best for picture books. I think the visual style that works best is if the artist who's doing it, and I'm not talking about the writer, I'm talking about the artist who's doing it is true to their own personal vision.
Do you think that being an illustrator is a gift, or do you think it's a teachable?
I think it's both. I think it's teachable up to a point, and then it becomes a gift because if you're willing to look deep to see your own vision and not to see who's popular, who's making the money, who's getting the awards. I mean, come on. If you look at some of the really good picture book artists and you look at their early work, you see the seeds of their style, their vision, the way they look at the world, and it's all visual, the way they look at the world, the way they look to the world, the way they dress, the way their houses look, the way they present themselves. But I think that, and I'm not sure it's being taught right at the moment because I think the computer has really interrupted classical training because there's nothing that can substitute for learning how to draw. Learning how to draw.
Where does the inspiration for a picture book come from?
I used to joke and say, oh, I take idea pills, but that's where it all really starts, is the idea. And sometimes it will start with a sketch. Strega Nona, I was sitting in a faculty meeting doodling, and her little face appeared on my doodle pad.
Really?
She channeled me. I want you to tell my story. And yet, like the art lesson was, based. It's a true story of my childhood, and I waited long enough, and then I finally thought, aha, I can get even with that teacher that wouldn't let me use my own crayons.
Are there tricks that you have? One of the great things about your work is that it absolutely is told from a child's point of view, and your memory of your own childhood seems to be voluminous.
Yeah.
So not only the
It is,
memory,
yeah.
not only the memory of what happened, but how you were feeling as a child about what happened.
That's the
and
important thing, how I was feeling. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how you access that.
What I did at one point was I sat back, and I had happened to move from New York to San Francisco. It was 1967. And I went into group therapy because everybody was going into group therapy. And the therapist that I worked with in the group kind of reopened the door for me to easy access to my own childhood.
And how do the rest of us go through that door?
I don't know. I know how I went through it, but I'm not saying that, that my way was the only way. But
was it just spending time trying to recreate that?
Yeah, things that we do in therapy would tick off things that I remember from my childhood. And I used to, the thing, when I was a child, I did the things of a child, but when I grew, I put away the things.
Right.
Well, that's a bunch of bull. You don't put it, if you want to spend your life working in making products, or let's talk about books as a product, for children, then you can't forget that you were a child. Because frankly, little 4 or 5-year-old Tomie suddenly was there by my elbow saying, I don't like that, that's boring. And I paid attention to little Tomie. I want to create beauty for children. I want to give children as much of my visual information that I can. I'm not trying to be altruistic. That's really a focus for me. Otherwise, I'll just stop doing books and just paint. I really have consciously chosen to give my creative life over to producing material for children, to make them secure, to make them laugh, to make them cry, to make them see things in a different way.
I know that you're an illustrator, but but you also write many of your books.
Yes,
so
I
I'd
do,
like to separate out the writing and the illustration process for purposes of this discussion, and have you take us through the writing process, your writing process.
Okay.
First of all, do picture books have a beginning, middle, and an end, like a traditional story?
Yeah. The writing of a picture book is very traditional.
Take us through the writing process.
Okay.
Do you construct the text first?
What happens first is I get the idea, and then I let the idea simmer. I'll make notes. I'll make little outlines. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate, and I'll let it sit until it's like a stew. You know, it has to sit to get the flavor, and I'll have questions, and then I'll present it to my editor, the idea, and we'll discuss it, and then I'll start writing. And I've learned just from all the 40 years of doing it, I've learned over and over again how to be economic.
In your words?
In my words. So, and that's the biggest problem I always face when I'm illustrating someone else's text. Quite often there's too much writing. I'm the kind of a writer, and there are different kinds of writers. I always know the end of my story. It's the middle that gets
sags, yes.
well, not sags, but it's the middle where I can, make other things happen, or I let, that's happening, but I know how it's going to end. And I always wait for the first line in my head to write down.
You start with the first line.
I start with the first line, yeah.
And what about the language of a picture book? Do you watch the language in terms of controlling a vocabulary or watching metaphor?
I don't control vocabulary because I really hate that when they give you a vocabulary list, which they used to do in the early dark ages of modern day picture book stuff. I mean, that's how Dr. Seuss started. He was given a vocabulary list, and he wrote his book to the vocabulary list. It was a bet between he and Bennett Cerf, I think, or somebody. Anyway, I learned that I don't use adjectives or adverbs. So when I started doing my chapter books, which are more about the writing than the illustration, I had to start using adjectives again.
Yeah,
right. Beef up.
Yeah.
So I guess it's being in the field for so long that I have it in my nature. But when I'm giving workshops for SCBWI, I always tell the group, keep it simple. Keep it simple. Let the complication come in your pictures. Let the pictures be rich with texture and descriptive images, and let your words be like a bare bone, like a title.
Which is why you eliminate the adjectives and the adverbs, because the illustrations are going to handle.
Yeah, you don't have to say
the
little girl in the red cape. You just say the little girl, a little girl. Yep.
Now, when somebody is writing a picture book who is not also going to be the illustrator, how do they indicate, or do they indicate to you, the eventual illustrator, what they see as the images? I see you getting angry already.
No, I'm not getting angry. If I get a manuscript that has descriptions of what I'm supposed to illustrate, I say no, thank you.
Really? All right. So describe that. Just describe that a little for people who may not know that.
In fact, unless it's something very important, like Jean Fritz. I've illustrated a couple of books that Jean Fritz has written, and she writes historical books. And it's very important to her to have the inkwell in the Constitution book.
Yes.
So she sends me scrap, photographs of the actual inkwell. So I know that I better put the inkwell in. I loved it when I did a folktale of hers, and she said, they didn't wear clothing, but please clothe them. This is this old battle, the illustrator and the writer are kept apart. And I think for ego reasons, it's very valid. Occasionally, once or twice, I've worked closely with an author, but it's somebody who I really knew well, and we could talk about things amongst each other. But it's always a good idea to go through the art director, because everybody's ego is on the block here.
Do you happen to have a manuscript?
Yeah, I do, right here.
Yep. So show us what a first draft looks like, and then how you break down a manuscript into
this is not
components.
This is not a typical manuscript, because the first draft didn't get changed. Nothing got changed. We just moved one, and it's a little poem. And this was the first draft of the manuscript.
Yeah.
And then I started to break it down. Now, this is what I did first.
I noticed, first of all, let me just
Yes,
point
sure.
out, I noticed,
Yep.
first of all,
It's hard to
how
see on camera, yeah.
Well, but I noticed how spare the text is.
Very spare.
Right. So this is two and a half manuscript pages, and that's not atypical
Double-spaced.
double spaced
Yeah.
with short lines,
Yeah.
and that's not atypical for a picture book.
Well,
so
if it was double that, that would be,
it would start to be getting too
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is at home and they have a 10-page single-space manuscript, this is not a picture book.
maybe not.
Yeah. All right. Good.
In that state, maybe
Okay.
it could be. Maybe it could get reduced or something.
So when you write the text, the next step is then to break it down into its
Yeah, and
component
that's sometimes the domain of the illustrator or the editor will
Right.
help. Because I find that writers don't always think visually, and I'm always looking for that page turn that we talked about
Right.
earlier. And so, this is what I do. I mean, this is my doodles. I wrote down that it was going to be a 32-page book, so I wrote 1 to 32. And then I decided, well, it doesn't need to be a 32-page book. Let me try it with self-ends, meaning that first page, paste it down, page 2 and 3 become end papers. So, and then there's only like 29, whatever it is.
Storytelling pages.
29 pages with, including front matter. And front matter in this particular book took care of 2 spreads, I guess.
So there's 27 storytelling pages.
So, 4, 5, 2, 3 were the end papers, 4, 5 was front matter, and the text begins on page 7.
Right.
And then I go all the way to the end. And then I actually broke it down visually like that for myself.
So that you know what's on
Yep.
each page. Now, I just want to say, as a writer, and for the writers who are watching, it's a very helpful technique to try to go through this process, even if your page breaks don't turn out to be the final
Yes,
page
exactly,
breaks,
exactly.
because it establishes a pace to the book.
Yep.
Can you talk about the pacing of a picture book?
Yeah, it should have a rhythm to it, You should be able to have, it's very musical in a sense, much more so than a novel, because I think a novel, you've got chapters and you can have beginning, middle, and ends in the chapters. But a picture book, because of the sparse text, should have a rhythm, and I'm trying to think of an example.
Goodnight Moon is the ultimate example of a book with rhythm.
Right, that has beautiful rhythm.
Right.
And it is like a song, and the refrain comes back, and and I like that sometimes. The refrain comes back and forth. On this particular manuscript, this is called the Song of Francis. It's sort of like a poem. It doesn't really. It's a non-event event. It's
not rhyming.
I don't rhyme. I'm not good at rhyming.
And we know that many writers are cautioned against writing rhyming text.
Well, yeah, there was a whole, I'm not going to touch a book that has a rhyme in it. Now I think that changes, in the...
It's definitely something to be aware of.
Yeah, it is.
though.
Unless you're really good at it, I think it's a good thing to avoid.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because it rhymes doesn't make it good, I think.
Right, exactly. And doesn't make it childlike.
That's right.
Just because we're brought up on nursery rhymes doesn't mean that, that's the way to go.
Is there room in a picture book text for dialogue?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things my editor or my editors, the editors I've worked with, they're always very I find that one of the most helpful things that they give me.
They suggest places
They
for dialogue?
say, there's a lot of description here. We need some dialogue to bring the characters to life. And sometimes it happens just very naturally. And
Now, all picture books, because they're intended for young children, are going to be read aloud. Do you, when you work on your manuscript, do you read it aloud?
yes, I do.
And what are you looking for when you read it aloud?
I want it to sound good.
Can you be any more specific?
Oh, I tape it, and I
You do?
listen to it. Oh yeah, I tape it and I listen to it.
And you're listening for?
The cadence, and I had to be very careful because I could take a bad manuscript and read it.
Well, love the sound of your own voice.
I love the sound of that.
Yeah, right. But you do read it aloud, and in that process, you change
I listen
words
to the
for
language.
rhythm.
Yep. I listen to the musicality, again, it's like theater. It's like musical theater, you know? Yeah.
Do picture books have to have a happy ending?
You know, I think that picture books, because they're for young children. Now, I don't want to sound like Pollyanna here, but, you know, life is hard enough. I think that, you know, I think there should be hope, you know?
Yes.
This is kind of far left field, but I mean, even Diary of Anne Frank has a very positive ending. Whereas there's a couple of picture books that have been published in the last years that are so
Dark.
I mean, Hans Christian Andersen. Oh my goodness.
I know.
Oh dear.
Yes, I know. Tragic.
Nothing.
They're tragic.
Everything. Oh.
People losing their feet.
Yes, right?
Yes.
Dying, becoming sea foam, you know?
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
Yes. So, but your belief is that we should, if not a happy ending, a hopeful
A
ending.
hopeful ending. I like
Yeah.
hopeful better than happy, yeah. Because sometimes happy endings can be sappy.
Is there room in a picture book, because they are so spare, to fully develop a character, a three-dimensional character?
I think so. I think Stregonona is a very three-dimensional character, and Big Anthony.
And that's done in the words
And the pictures, yes.
So the words, for a writer who is a non-illustrator, the words have to have enough, have to be suggestive enough for the illustrator.
They have to have enough air for the illustrator to breathe. If they suck up all the air, if the writer sucks up all the air, then I'm not interested in trying to illustrate it. Yeah.
But what do you mean by that exactly, air? You mean they
Give
have
me
to
room. Give me room. Give me, you know, give me liberty or give me death.
So in other words, they would not tell every detail. They would.
No.
And that's where you say that you eliminate the adjectives and the adverbs, and you go for the story is it tells the story briefly.
Tells the story.
Dramatizes
it.
the important scenes.
The unillustratable quality of the character can be described.
And then put some words in the character's mouth so that there's dialogue that you can because dialogue would indicate a dramatic scene. So that that gives you something to illustrate.
Yeah, I think I'll give you an example out of my own work. You know, Stregonona, which means grandma witch. Okay, and I say that. And but Stregonona was getting old, and she needed someone to help her tend her little garden. So she put up a sign in the town square. Now, that gives me the chance to show Stregonona, you know, putting up the sign in the town square, showing the town square, throwing in a few characters so you get an idea of where she lives. And then the next line is, and Big Anthony, who didn't pay attention, saw the sign and went to her house. Now, I don't have to describe Big Anthony. I show what he looks like. But he's there in that town square. And, you know, so does that make any sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense because it suggests the setting.
Yes.
Suggests a character. It doesn't say her back was hunched, her hands were wrinkled.
Stregonona was getting old. She wore a little white bonnet. She walked with a cane, and her nose was as big as her chin, and you know, and she had no teeth, and you know, and needed glasses, and had lumbago.
Right. And also, the other thing I noticed about that is it gets right into the story.
Yeah.
And right into the complication. Right away, Big Anthony didn't follow directions, and you know that there's.
Well, he did then, but it's but he does. But it's told he does. Who didn't pay attention. Yes.
Right. So that's just an indication of where the trouble
trouble might come. Yeah.
Right. Of where the trouble is going to come.
Yeah.
So it really is, in a way, like writing a poem, in that it suggests imagery. But doesn't.
Oh, I think that's really a great analogy, frankly. I never thought of it that way. And the Song of Francis I consider a poem, and but that's a very good analogy. Picture book texts are more poetic than novels. I mean, not that a novel can't have poetic language and beautiful language, but that's very good. I like that.
Well, you know, there's that old Mark Twain quote when he wrote a long letter to a friend. He said, "I would have written you a shorter letter if I'd had the time." that working in a short form is often more difficult because every word matters.
And you know, when people are young in the profession, not necessarily young in age, but when new writers are, you know, every word is so precious. I went through it myself. How dare you take out my words? You know, I struggled to put that "the" in there.
It's my favorite "the."
My favorite "the," and you took it out.
Yeah, well, when you receive a text that's perhaps not your own, how do you decide what gets illustrated and what goes in and what remains text.
Okay, this is where this breakup comes into it. That's the first thing I do. This is the size of the book, and I took the text and taped it down.
So the first thing that you would do when you start the illustration process is break the text
Yep.
down into its component pages, so you know where the turns
and even
are.
if I just do it on a little tiny dummy, then I can look at the turning of the page before I even start doing a sketch.
And that also tells you how much room you have for the illustration,
That's
depending
right.
on how much
And
text
if
is
you
there.
have too much text on one page and not enough on the
And
other,
not enough,
because this manuscript had a problem inherent to it, was that there was a whole long line about birds in it. Somewhere here.
So
And this is where the
what was the problem?
designer.
The problem with this page was?
This was I wanted this to be one after the other. It's not a sentence. It's a list. Red birds, orange birds, yellow birds, green birds, blue birds, violet birds, brown birds, black birds, white birds, and white birds. And these birds all come to hear Francis's song. So this is what the designer did. And I put this on a double spread.
Yes.
So it wasn't heavy in text.
How do you decide what gets a single and what gets a double
That
page spread?
I trust my judgment when I do the dummy.
And pacing is obviously
Very
a
important.
requirement.
Very important.
And what are you trying to accomplish in the pacing? Are you trying to slow down the big scenes? And
I'm trying to make the drama, make the page turn, make this book, the middle of the book, and it just happened to turn into the middle, is kind of a big denouement, and it's a whole text with no words, a whole page with no words whatsoever, and it's just this big celebration.
you often will have a climactic scene, kind of a set piece scene,
Right.
where everything is going on at once.
And this isn't climactic because the ending, then it quiets down.
I see. So
So
it's not
it's a peak like this. It goes da da da.
it quiets down again.
And sometimes your book can go da da, or sometimes it can go da da.
Right. So many picture books are used as bedtime stories. That in some books there's a tradition of kind of settling
Quieting
down
down,
at the
yes,
end.
exactly.
So it's really different from the structure of a film, say, or a novel, where it gets progressively more. The action and suspense escalates at the end and leaves you on a highly suspenseful note. Often with a picture book, the end will be soothing or peaceful because we're getting ready.
I think so. Yeah, I think yeah.
But
I don't think that's. I think that the danger in saying that is that, like, oh, that's a rule.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
No rules.
The story's got to be what the story is.
What are the common pitfalls of an illustrator? What's your inner dialogue that you say, I have to watch out for this?
Yeah, the pitfall is it's showing off.
Showing off.
Oh, that is the biggest pitfall.
Say more about showing off.
I want Lynn to be so impressed with how talented I am, and just no one draws a fingernail like I do.
Right.
And,
And the opposite of showing off is what?
letting the work have a life of its own.
Who determines and how is it determined the size and the dimension of the books?
Yeah, that's all determined by production, the production department, and it's all based on money. What the size of the book is, how expensive it's going to be, how many pages. Usually, by the time you get to start your finished art, all of those decisions have been made. Sometimes they're made before you even get the manuscript.
Wouldn't you need to know that in order to lay out your book?
Well, sometimes you lay out the book, and then the size changes. So you put it on a Xerox machine or whatever, or you redo it. That's why I do my layouts very, very, very loose and rough. But then you do your finished artwork, and whatever media you're going to do it in. Now I work in acrylics, and I work the same size. There's always
The same size as the book.
the same size as the book, except for my chapter books, which have black and white spot illustrations. I do those up 1.5 times.
Let's talk about the various media. What media are available to picture book illustrators, and what are the
Anything
advantages?
these days.
Anything these days.
Anything.
But
Anything.
let's list them. Let's
Well,
list some
there's
of
a
them.
traditional. Most illustrators avoid oils because they take so long to dry. But not everybody. Alice Provenson still works in oil on overlays, or acetate, or vellum, probably, I think it is. I tend to use acrylics because there's an added thing that original art for books is there's a market for it, or original art of children's books. And so I was trained classically so that you don't want your art to fade. Watercolors were never meant to be stable. It's a beautiful medium, and if you produce it right away, that's fine, but they fade over time.
But it's an option.
It's an option. And I use acrylics like watercolors, but acrylics, when they dry, they're waterproof. That's what I like about them. Pastels books have been done in pastels, Prismacolor pencil, black ink and on white paper, scratchboard, woodcut, collage. Yeah, I'm an Eric Carle, master of collage. There's fabric, quilting.
How is that done when people
they
work
do?
three-dimensional?
Yeah, they do their three-dimensional. Then it's shot as a photograph.
What about digital technology?
I'm not the right person to ask about that because first of all I'm too old. I think just like any other media, digital technology has its shortcomings as well, because your image is only as good as what you plug into the computer, into your program. But it's possible, certainly is. There are books that are done, with computer-generated art. Yeah.
What's the role of the color palette in a book? How do you establish a color palette?
Now, for me, color is one of the most personal areas of art and illustration, and I think people perceive color differently. I got absolutely enamored with color and what color does. The interaction of color and when I was in art school, and I used to spend hours just mixing paints to see what colors I could make. Some people are very insensitive to color. Some people believe that you should only use primary colors because the books are for little kids.
When you start to paint a book, do you have a palette in mind for that book? Is there some coordination? I don't mean to make it sound like.
Probably I do. But it's very unconscious in a way. That's what my training has done for me. So, I'm always amazed that ballet dancers, once they can do that, they don't have to really think it out, when they're performing. When they're rehearsing, they do. So
let's talk about that for a minute. What kind of training should a children's book illustrator have?
I think they should go to art school
and learn
drawing, learn color, learn how to paint, learn how to push paint around on a surface. Drawing is very important. You really have to know how to draw the figure, I think. And I wish some of the younger artists weren't so just surface, designy. Wish they had some substance underneath that. I looked at Matisse as the consummate artist who could draw beautifully, but then he would reduce and reduce and reduce, and then we finally get those wonderful abstract, that painting of the dancers going around. But it's there. The bones are underneath those shapes. So and I think that learning something about the history of your ancestors, like the artists that have come before you in the generations, is very, very valuable to an artist.
How do you work on consistency from page to page, keeping the setting and the characters
that's another
consistent?
thing that I guess you learn that. You learn how to draw the same figure if you can't draw the same character in a whole lot of different situations, then maybe you weren't meant to be an illustrator. Maybe you were meant to be a painter.
The skills that an illustrator needs, among the skills that certainly they need to be able to...
Consistency, character consistency, atmosphere consistency. All the illustrations have to look as though they come from the same planet.
From the same hand.
From the same hand, from the same town, from the same period. Yeah.
And then what we've talked about earlier, which is the ability to dramatize, which may not be a requirement of a painter.
No, it may not. It may not. I'm always thinking of boring paintings as not being very dramatic,
What are the stages that an illustration goes through from beginning to end? And what are the stages that the book goes through from beginning to end?
Oh, wow.
Production stages.
Production.
Let's start with the illustration.
Okay,
what are
I'll
the
talk
stages?
just from my own point of view, because I think every illustrator is different.
Right.
For me, it's the thumbnail, the quick sketch, developing that. then getting to the point where I'm just happy to sit down with my paper and my pencil and sketch in what I'm going to do and then go right into it. And if it's not working out, I just rip it up and start again. Then it goes to the publisher. They scan it. It goes to the printer. They print it.
What about the painting of it?
Oh, I do that. Yeah, that's in there somewhere. Yeah, yeah. That's
So it
before I
goes
send it to them. I
from
paint it.
thumbnail to
Refinement a little bit, not much, but a little bit of a refinement, and then the painting of it. And then if the painting isn't going well, I rip it up and start again.
how do you work with your art director?
The art director is the editor, the visual editor. There was a time when there weren't art directors, just editors. But having an art director for me is such a luxury because we talk a different language than the editor and I talk. We're talking language. We're talking sentence structure. We're talking, where with my art director, who I really adore her. Her name is Cecilia Young, and I hope she'll be my art director for the rest of my life. We can talk about. We usually talk about food.
When you're not talking about food.
But when we're not talking about food, we're talking about color and technique and paint. And she understands it. You're not talking to somebody about some unknown thing. I mean, you can't talk to how you make a beautiful bechamel sauce to someone who's only gone to McDonald's. Yeah.
Let's talk about creativity for a moment, the general subject of creativity, because some of our viewers are writers, some are illustrators, and some are, we're all at various paths in our creative development. Where do you feel your creativity comes from?
I think it comes from several sources. My creativity, I'm only going to speak for myself. I think it comes from maybe my collective unconscious. I have artists in the family. There are artists in the family. Twin cousins on the Irish side of the family that became very well-known photographers. My father, I think, wanted to be an artist, but he never was given the opportunity. And I think that early encouragement, I wasn't told not to draw when I was a kid. I think the right teachers. I had good teachers every other year. And then the choice to go to an art school. And I think the holding it all together was tremendous drive on my part.
Creative drive?
Creative
ambition?
drive, yeah, tremendous.
Well, what do you do? What do you do in your life to encourage creativity, to foster your creativity?
Well, I read, and I read all kinds of books. I watch movies.
Movies are clearly a big.
They're a big thing with me. I go to theater. I love theater, especially musical theater. I don't like to go to museums anymore. I used to when I was an art student. Every Saturday you'd find me in either the Metropolitan or the Whitney or the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And now museums are too crowded. They're too crowded. But I look at images all the time. I'm crazy about folk art. So I was traveling to Mexico 4 and 5 times a year, just to go to folk art markets and things like that. So, and I surround myself with the things that mean something to me visually. I want to walk into any given room at any given time in my house and be blown away by how beautiful it is.
What are creativity killers for you? What squashes your creativity?
Personal problems that don't seem to have a resolution, because then I think too much about that. And when that does start to happen, do I run to the meditation bench and meditate. Distractions are a real creativity killer for me.
What do you know now that you wish you had known when you were starting out about children's books or about the creative process?
Absolutely. Let's see. I think I know now what I need to know now. I think I knew when I was starting what I needed to know when I was starting. I've never said, "Oh, if I had known that then." I've never said that. I've never looked back. I think that, I think we're in a little scary times right at the moment, but that'll pass, hopefully. I have been blessed by this career, frankly. It has allowed me to not only make a living, and a fairly good living, but it's allowed me to express myself in a way that when I go to bed at night, I'm thrilled to be me.
Is there any one true thing that you know about the creative process?
Yes, it's a monster.
The creative process?
Creative process is a monster, and if you don't feed it, it will eat you.
It sounds ominous.
It is ominous. And I think the worst fear that I have, or I had in my life, and this is going to sound kind of quasi-religious, but you know, I really do believe that we have to honor the gifts we've been given, and I really do believe I've been given a gift to live my life as an artist and as a creative person, whatever that means. And if I don't pay attention to it and honor it, it'll destroy me. And it's not going to destroy me. I'm going to be honest to it and be faithful to it, and thankful that I was given that gift.
So if you were to leave us with a word, the word of either inspiration or counsel, a single word.
Ooh. Courage.
Courage.
Courage. There's a wonderful line in a play, "Courage, mon brave." I mean, courage, my brave one.
Thank you for being here with us.
Oh,
Thank you for
my
being so
pleasure.
generous to share your enormous expertise.
I hope there's one person out there that will benefit from my blabbering.
Good. Thank you. Well, it wasn't
My
blabbering.
pleasure,
And
Lynn.
thank you, Tomie. I
Thank
love
you
this
so
interview.
much.
Thank you.